Hey y'all, Boogie Night here. How's it going? And why am I not wearing black all of a sudden? Oh, right, there's a reason I did that, and it was on purpose. Check it out. Hello, universe, I'm here. It's Josh Wasabi t-shirt, and oops, wait, what fell on the floor? Goodness. Well, it was strategically draped across my lap. It was put there also on purpose for a nice little bit of shameless commerce. Oh, hello, it's a Sonic Boogie Reviews t-shirt complete with the trilby. That's adorable. And check it out, both this and the Sonic Boogie shirt are, of course, 100% property of Lilia's Cheese Hoard. Now, these shirts are a little too expensive right now to actually sell, but if this is something you really are interested in and want to purchase, or if you just really want to throw your money away, you could just burn it or throw it off a bridge, but that's beside the point. If you are interested in supporting that or any of the other Cheese Hoard channels, i.e. most importantly, Lady Lilia, let me know, because I know there's a local guy and I'm going to try and start working on them, and I really want to be able to support the other channels. And yes, to answer your question, all proceeds from sales of the shirts will be going to said content creators, so don't worry about that. Anyways, I've talked enough about that. So, let's go ahead and let's talk about Paul Newman. Now, if you know Paul Newman at all, you've probably seen flicks like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Color of Money, or one of his latter films before he died, rest in peace, Road to Perdition. But there was an old 1981 crime neo-noir movie that not a lot of people know of, and that's actually called Fort Apache the Bronx, which was fantastic. I had a blast watching it last night with Morgus and Josh Wasabi. Of course, The Pain Train. We're going to watch these things together because sharing is caring. Now, the title by itself, you may be thinking, like, how is this a crime movie if it's called Fort Apache the Bronx other than the title? Well, for a brief history lesson, Fort Apache was an outpost that took place during the French and Indian War, where the Americans actually had their base set up. And there were a couple of times that Fort Apache was surrounded by the enemy. So a lot of times, since this took place at a dilapidated precinct, I think it was the 19th precinct in South Bronx, they always felt like they were surrounded by the enemy. And this took place, while it was filmed in the 80s, it definitely had a 1960s, 70s kind of gritty vibe to it. And it was a really good movie. Paul Newman was amazing in this as Murphy. Usually when you think of Paul Newman's older things like once again, Cool Hand Luke or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, he had this kind of mischievous, kind of like, I'm not taking gruff from anybody, I'm going to do my thing, I'm going to have fun, I'm going to get into shenanigans. This movie was a lot darker, and in my opinion, this was actually kind of the groundbreaking role that helped him segue into some of his more serious roles further down the pike. So, it was a really good movie. I wouldn't say it split the atom like... I'm going to keep going back to Cool Hand Luke because that was one of the first Paul Newman movies I ever saw, and that was a favorite. This movie, as Josh and Morgus kind of said, it was more of an episodic faux-umentary that focused on Murphy and his companion. What's his name? Was it Alo? Yeah, Alo, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure I'll get actually if I'm wrong. So just for the duration, we're just going to say his buddy cop, or his cop buddy. But there's a lot of little small subplots kind of intertwined with each other, but there really was no central plot other than just focusing on the community. It starts at the beginning with two rookie cops being propositioned by a hooker played by Pam Grier, and I gotta tell you, Pam Grier playing a psycho hooker was amazing. She fit the role to the T. So she basically propositions two cops and then basically shoots them in their car. So you're thinking maybe she's going to be the MacGuffin for this movie, but she only appears in a couple of more scenes after that. So it kind of takes you down one path and then just kind of takes you in a different path and then takes you down a different path and a different path, but that's not the point. What you need to know about this movie is the subplots come together in a fairly cohesive stream, even though it could have easily been considered a miniseries, and the miniseries was scrapped and put together as a movie, kind of like The Gemini Man, except this movie had talent behind it and effects and was overall nice. So it focuses once again on Murphy and his cop buddy, And they start out by just basically reporting into the precinct and meeting up with Connolly, the new captain of the precinct, and their personalities do not match at all. Connolly is a very straight by the book, get it done kind of guy, whereas Murphy and his companion are very kind of, it's going to get done, we're going to make things happen, we're going to solve some crimes, we have a good track record, but we're going to let things happen in almost a Starsky and Hutch-like fashion. It was actually kind of good. I mean, there were a lot of serious moments to it. In the beginning, you actually have a kind of cross-dressing guy on the roof of a building, threatening that he's going to jump off and make himself fly. His words, not mine. Which almost, as Josh pointed out, was a throwback to Lethal Weapon. And you're just thinking, okay, they go from the lighthearted, joking personality of the two buddy cops to this. But luckily, they were actually able to grab him by his ankles. They didn't arrest him, but they did take him to the hospital, and they actually did say they were going to check back up on them. And it was a really kind of nice, touching, poignant scene that shows that in this precinct with a lot of hard-ass cops and a lot of kind of like, well, we're going to make arrests, we don't really care about the rest of the community, which I'm going to get into, they have showed a genuine interest in trying to repair the fallout and the debris in this less than high-rise and brownstone group of people. Because let's face it, when you think of South Bronx, what comes to mind? Particularly back in that era, you think of crime, you think of death, you think of drugs, you think of hookers, and there are a lot of hookers and pimps in this movie, along with drug dealers, but I'm going to get into that. I mean, it's a degradation of the community is what comes into my mind. And I think Josh and Morgus agree with me on that. But going back to, so they leave him at the hospital. There's another scene in the hospital with this one guy dressed up as a doctor who actually kind of looks a little bit like Claudio Sanchez from Coheed and Cambria, basically dealing drugs in the stairwell to these other people. They could have been patients. They could have just been addicts. They could have been anybody. But that just goes to show just how bad the community has just kind of just caved in on itself and the overall tension. I mean, you have scenes where Murphy and his buddy are just being kind of stared down by some people, and other scenes, like when they basically talk a bum out of letting go of his knife. I mean, there's little scenes where they're clapping and cheering and basically congratulating the cops, including the guy they take the knife away from. So it's this constant struggle between good cop, bad cop, and community. And you can, in hindsight, I didn't see it at the time, there's a lot of little subtleties that show to this building tension in the community between the police and the community. And I think back a lot to the book Hard Revolution, which took place during Dr. King's time and black cops being accepted onto the police force and a mainly white police force. And like Josh and Morgus pointed out, there's not a lot of camaraderie between the Latino community and the white community. And I kind of see that now. I didn't really think about it at the time, but just this whole concept that it's a strictly kind of, white enforced group in a timeline where segregation is still very, or not just segregation per se, but racism is very involved and it's very tight there. You know that something's going to build to a head, but it doesn't show it other than a couple of subtleties. But if you're not looking for those, you're not going to see them. And this whole time, while they're doing these little crimes like getting the knife away from the bum, looking at a couple of the druggies, a couple of the hookers, you have Pam Grier still killing off cops. I mean, there's another scene where she's prepping to go down on this one guy, and right when it looks like things are about to happen, or as Josh would say, damn moment. Sorry, Josh, I had to quote that because that was a perfect time every time that happened. She put a razor blade in her mouth and just nipped the jugular. I'm just like, wow, this woman has talent and is scary as hell. But later on in the movie, she drops away from being the MacGuffin. There wasn't a MacGuffin in this movie. Like I keep saying, it goes back to the community. And at some point, after the cross-dressing jumper basically goes into the care of the doctors and whatnot, he gets released, don't worry, because he was a character looking at him reminded me of Mr. Z from Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but it was just kind of just showing the times are changing in this neighborhood, and you have to accept change, which goes back into the main plot of the movie, that times are moving on. So he meets the nurse, and basically when you first meet her, it turns into a scene like out of Top Gun when Maverick's hitting on the T-shirt. You know, at some point I expected his buddy to be like, crash and burn, Mav. But they go out for a drink, and things start to look pretty good. They do the nasty, and he starts developing feelings for her, which, if you know Murphy for more than 5 seconds, you know that he's had a rough and tumble past. And you find out he's divorced. He's quite the boozer. Like most of Paul Newman's characters, he smokes like a freight train. So it looks like things are turning about. He's got a good job. He's got a good track record. He's put in over a decade on the force. Despite him and Connolly not getting along, he still is showing the way of sewing up cases. But that doesn't help within the community. In fact, there's one little foreshadowing moment after they make a two-bagged monster. He gets up to smoke a cigarette, and he notices track marks on her body. Yeah, this ties back into the drug dealers. You see a trend here. Anyway, and his companion, by the way, is also dating or engaged. It's not really said. It's implied to be engaged, but I don't know. He's kind of got a lady going on, and he desperately wants to seal the deal in Boogie. She's a little more pure, and she lives with her family, like a lot of these movies that take place in that timeline do. So, if I'm jumping all over the place and kind of rambling, that's basically the overarching plot. It's crimes, meets their significant others, other attached scenes like the drug dealer. It all comes together in the end, but at the time you really need to just go, no. Maybe. And there's a lot of discussion in this time frame when I was talking to Morgus and Josh on Discord and just trying to piece things together, which once again ties back into it being episodic, because you will have one plot ending, one plot ending, one plot ending. But the big climax that appears without any kind of rising action is after a certain number of arrests, basically the community explodes and basically riots against the precinct, against Fort Apache, because of certain arrests made to various, I guess, I wouldn't say high-level people in the community, but people in the low-class community that demanded a certain amount of respect. And it goes to the point that the captain is offering free vacations for every arrest they're made. And the way it's brought up is the fact that I'm not going to ask questions, make the arrests, do the booking, you're going to get vacation. So, of course, it's that whole kind of hands-free, do what you want to, do what you need to. And the cops really couldn't care less, because they just really want them, they bust their humps, and it's a very crazy and scary community. They're going to do what they need to make them ends. So it appears completely out of the blue without any kind of, once again, just, I guess, rising action or direct points to lead to that. It was just kind of like, wait, where'd that come from? But once again, talking to Josh and Morgus, it makes sense, because at the timeline, if we lived in that era of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, we would probably be more privy to the fact that those communities, particularly the lower income ones, have a very strained relationship with maybe the police. And they actually Morgus made a really good point to this. It would be the equivalent of, in 15, 20 years from now, somebody in 2013, 2030, 2040 is watching a movie, and without nowhere, some terrorists appeared on an airplane and really sinister music. So, once again, it's very driven towards that timeline and that demographic. But the riot ends almost as quickly as it starts, but not without kind of Murphy and his buddy kind of hardening up. They've been pretty hard to begin with, but seeing cops... There's a scene where two other police officers are dragging a protester on the roof of a neighboring building, and they're saying, like, what are you doing? What's happening? And they throw her off. No, it's not an arrest. They just literally throw her off the roof and watch her fall to the death. It was pretty... it was definitely eye-opening. Once again, it goes back to the grit of this. And even the silly scenes were gritty, and it couldn't be compared to like another movie like, say, Lethal Weapon. the way I can kind of quote this movie, it's very similar to American Ninja. It's not very silly. It's just very like, wow. And compared to the silly movies we've been seeing in the past with all the shenanigans like Ninja and the Dragon's Den or any of the Godfrey Ho movies, this was definitely an eye-opener. But once again, the acting with Murphy, his buddy, Isabella, the captain, it was very predictable, yes, but also very well done. Now, I keep going back to Pam Grier, and then that's when we discovered that she was not the main plot. She was not the MacGuffin, but she had ties to the drug dealers, who I mentioned earlier, and so did Isabella, Murphy's girlfriend, or mistress, or I want to say girlfriend because they talk about running away together and starting over, but yeah, you can probably guess what happened. Spoiler alert, both of them die. Pam Grier, I keep calling her by her actress name because she didn't really have a name. I mean, she was literally just what we called her the psycho hooker. She goes to meet with the drug dealers, the same ones that are moving within the community. They kill her, even though after she tries to kill one of them. Murphy gets into a fight with Isabella. They sort of patch things up, but she goes to see them, the drug dealers. But they know she has ties to Murphy, so what do? They give her an overdose. So even a nurse who is trying to make people well and feel better and treat them properly, once again, the low-income process goes back to bite them. And to even make things even worse, the drug dealers go to try and deal more drugs to the hospital. They don't go into details about what drugs are. I'm going to say it's either meth or heroin. It's one of the more hard drugs. It's definitely not weed. It could be coke, but I'm going to say it's either heroin or meth, the way that beside the track marks on their arms and legs and how they act, and it's definitely showing signs of tweaking. But I could be wrong. But the end of the movie, once again going back to the episodic thing, shows a standoff with hostages in the hospital right after Isabella's been admitted for her overdose, and Murphy and his buddy are trying to remedy the situation. And they do. They don't talk them down. They actually do a scene where they're actually rappelling down the side of the hospital, which, as bad as it sounds, almost reminded me of the end of the Blues Brothers when they're going down the side of City Hall in Chicago. But that's beside the point. They end the standoff, but Murphy also finds out that Isabella's dead because of the overdose. And of course he would be grieving. I would too if the love of my life would be, died from whatever sketchy means, or just died from whatever means impossible, because it shows that he has a heart under that meanness, under that just tough exterior of the stereotypical cop. So he actually turns in his badge, but the captain wants him to stick around. But it ends actually kind of on a funny note where he's driving away from the police station, badgeless, even though the captain wants him to stay, like I said. Buddy cop jumps out of the back seat, and they're driving, and they see a guy basically throwing trash off his roof and running away, and the companion is like, "You let him get away with that?" So it ends on a comedy note because they literally speed off, stop the car, and chase after them. Still frame credits. But even those moments of comedy, still there's an underlying layer of sadness and depression and grit and grief. And I think like I said about Ninja Champion, it's not a big plot, but you don't watch it just because of the plot. You watch it because of the characters. And that's what this movie is about. Picture a lot of little subplots that kind of come together and spread off at the end, and that's what this is. Like Josh and Morgan said, this was episodic. It was a fake documentary. It was a faux-umentary, like I said before, but it was really well done. There weren't a lot of special effects, not just because of the time it was shot in the early 80s, but just it could happen at any time. That's the thing that kind of drove it home for me, was that it could happen today. It could happen tomorrow. I mean, living in D.C., living outside Philadelphia and Jersey, living in Cincinnati during the time of the race riots, it had that mark that it could happen. And it could also, in the current day and age, it could happen between some other religious or cultures that happen right now. So I apologize that this review is a little bit on the convoluted side because, well, once again, that's what this movie was, confusing and convoluted, but overall, very solid crime movie. Definitely set the bar for crime movies, and honestly, with the exception of Road to Perdition, Paul Newman's one of his last ones, once again, rest in peace to the late great one, it really set the bar because it was just really well done. I love the characters. They were all believable, particularly for that time, and just the way it was paced was very well done as well. So if you like noir movies, if you like crime movies, cop movies, if you like Paul Newman, or if you just want to see Pam Grier go on a rampage with a very bad wig, I would check that out too. So with that in mind, I got another review coming up this weekend, completely different. It's actually a theater movie. Ooh, and a couple other Let's Plays. So with that in mind, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll catch you on the flip side, all right? Peace.